Welcome back, guys. This is the American Culture War Part 2. And if you made it through Part 1 in its entirety, I applaud you. I know Part 1 got long and parts were painful to watch, but I felt that many of them were necessary. As you'll see, a lot of it was similar to what went on during the Chinese Cultural Revolution with the struggle sessions and so on. We also covered the hypocrisy of the media and how it covers anything that comes from the left. We covered some dictatorial culture war style speeches by Biden and J.B. Pritzker. We also went over how the Justice Department is being weaponized and used against Trump supporters and 2A supporters, and how for a while they've been infiltrating and radicalizing conservative movements. We also went over cultural Marxism and some of its founders and objectives, like Frankfurt School, Antonio Gramsci, and who funds them, like the tax-exempt foundations. In this episode, we're going to turn our attention to the useful idiots, the more boots-on-the-ground Antifa types, and we're going to look at the Marxist organizers and all the institutions that these Marxists have infiltrated. They're in positions of power in government and the Democratic Party and media, etc. We're also going to get into the outcome of communist policies wherever they come to power, as we talked about before. We're going to look at China's Cultural Revolution. We're going to look at the horrors of communism and its policies. What I first want to draw your attention to, though, are these groups. These groups who rioted nonstop during 2020 and basically did it with impunity, like we've seen. They were also bailed out, like we have seen in Part 1. These groups who have done all this, they're highly organized. They organize these protests and these riots. These groups always end up being Marxist. There's always a Marxist background. They're always Marxist organizers. And we have to understand that what is the goal of Marxism? To overthrow capitalism. So they are not good for America. And one of the worst parts about that is they have our kids mostly, because they have the schools, they have the colleges. So we're in a dangerous time. This is why I continue to repeat myself and say we need to know our enemy. So let's start off with, as I've stated, these Marxist organizers, the boots on the ground Antifa types, and BLM, of course. First, we're going to look to the progressives, and we're going to see exactly what it's like to be infected with this cultural Marxist mind virus that it is. I wanted to start here with a clip by Hillsdale that gets into the communist background of BLM.
Many see the slogan Black Lives Matter, or BLM, as a noble plea for equal treatment under the law. It's a cry to secure the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everyone. But what does the Black Lives Matter organization actually stand for? To find out, look no further than their leaders: Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrisse Cullors. Here's Cullors in a revealing 2015 interview.
We actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists.
Visit the Black Lives Matter website and read the list of demands to get a sense of how deep a transformation they seek. One of those demands proclaims, quote, "We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another. We can't be certain, but it's hard to believe this radical agenda is what most signed up for when they made that hashtag Black Lives Matter social media post, or that every employee customer, or shareholder at Nike endorses a disruption of the family. Garza first coined the phrase in 2013, the day George Zimmerman was acquitted of murdering Trayvon Martin. Her friend Colors added the hashtag and joined the words so it could travel through social media. Tometi created the digital platform blacklivesmatter.com. According to Robert Stilson of the Capital Research Center, the group became a self-styled global network in 2014 and a fiscally sponsored project of a separate progressive nonprofit in 2016. This evolution has helped embolden an agenda vastly more ambitious than a national defunding of police. The goals of the Black Lives Matter organization go far beyond what most people think. They're hiding in plain sight, there for the world to see. If only we read beyond the slogans and the summaries of the movement they helped to create. It's a distinction with a profound difference. Their radical Marxist agenda is bent on supplanting the basic building blocks of society, the family, replacing it with the state, and destroying the economic system that has lifted more people from poverty than any other. Theirs is a blueprint for misery, not justice. It must be rejected.
Some of these organizations were infiltrated by Trevor Loudon. Let's take a look at them and see just how organized they are. Also notice how involved they are with BLM.
Our first big action is planned. This is going to be a period party at Mike Pence's house. We've got a bunch of folks who are organizing that. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be the last few days living in Chevy Chase before he moves into the Mike presidential residence, and we're going to send him off with a bit. Early in the morning, we're going to be doing blockades. We're going to be blockading checkpoints into the security zone. We're also going to be blockading roads and other modes of transit.
When you see blockades, this is how they're organized.
Into the city. We're going to do everything we can to try to stop people from being able to access the power.
We need to basically make this a non-peaceful transition at the absolute cost.
And so how are you guys planning to disrupt then throughout the day?
Starting with everything from checkpoint blockades to traffic blockades. The plan is to make the entire inauguration a total clusterfuck.
When it came to the candidate they didn't like, they weren't going to stand for a peaceful transition of power.
There are clear ties between the Democrats and the J20 movement, but our team has discovered even more troubling connections. Here we have assembled profiles of the puppet masters guiding the chaos unfolding on America's streets. All are leaders of the Workers' World Party or the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. Workers' World followed the theories of communist dictators Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong. They have been organizing protests and riots in the United States from the Vietnam War to Ferguson, Missouri. Freedom Road supports several Muslim and communist terrorist organizations. They have extensive networks in college campuses across the nation, and they can rally thousands of young people to their causes. Larry Holmes leads the Workers' World Party. He loves North Korea. Donald Trump, not so much.
Yesterday he was a monster, a racist, a misogynist, and today, well, he's our president. We must give him a chance. We're not giving him a chance. No peace, no peace, no Trump, no peace, no Trump.
North Korea good, orange man bad.
Workers' World Youth Leader Tom Michalak.
If Tim Pool had a commie cousin named Jim Pool, this is him.
Has been an active leader of the anti-Trump movement in New York and Detroit. In 2014, he traveled to Moscow as a guest of the anti-globalization movement of Russia.
The United States government is the greatest enemy to the peoples of the world.
Good evening, comrades and friends. I visited Moscow, Russia. Our host for the duration of our stay was Alexander Ionov, president of the anti-globalization movement of Russia. The underlying current among all their members is a staunch opposition to Western imperialism and the determination that all nations have the right to self-determination.
This kid's the Napoleon Dynamite of revolutionaries.
Idiot!
The movement is led by Moscow businessman Alexander Ionov. Comrade Ionov supports Syria, Iran, Venezuela, the Palestinian Authority, and anyone else who hates America. Meanwhile, Workers' World Party youth leaders are working to mobilize thousands of young people into the streets. Taran Fivek, who works on Syrian refugee resettlement for the United Nations, is running J20 out of New York. Romero Funes, a journalist, is organizing mass protests in Los Angeles.
So I've been involved with other comrades in planning the resistance that will happen on J20.
It's going to be one of the most important political events in modern history.
We've positioned ourselves as the revolutionary socialist contingent that's going to be present in DC.
This is a global day of action. I want to just quickly list some of the cities where there are actions taking place. As we mentioned, DC and LA, New York, of course, Rochester, Oakland, St. Petersburg, Florida, Atlanta, Savannah, Georgia, Chicago, Illinois, New Orleans, Boston, Baltimore, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Detroit, Charlotte, Durham, Raleigh, Buffalo, Cleveland, Portland, Philly, Huntington.
We refuse to be governed by such a racist, sexist monster. But it doesn't really matter to us either if they can go ahead and say we can't drop anybody off at metro stations, or they can pretend all that they want, that they can have control over the masses when they finally get into the streets. But as we all know, we're going to get there no matter what. We're going to be out there in force. We're going to be sending a really strong message to the rest of the world.
Workers' World Party member Caleb Maupin is reaching millions of Americans daily through his positions with Iran's Press TV and Moscow's Russia Today. There's a young man in America called Caleb Maupin, a member of the Workers' World Party, an extreme radical.
U.S. society, born in racism, slavery, and the slaughter of the indigenous people, is now
but still
entering
chooses
a
to live in
political and
America.
economic crisis.
Who's been working as a correspondent for Press TV and now Russia Today, RT, going around these anti-Trump rallies, reporting on them, reporting on the division in American society.
Trump, he did win according to the U.S. Constitution, so you're saying you're protesting against the American democratic system, right?
So did Hitler. That doesn't mean we have to accept the way this as it is. We need to fight back against this fascist system.
Why do you think he'd be doing that?
Well, look at what he's doing and what he's working for. He's coming from a hardcore Marxist-Leninist fringe group that supports the North Korean regime, working as a paid agent for the Iranian government's propaganda machine, and then moving over as a paid agent to Vladimir Putin's propaganda machine. So when you're looking at this from a case of ideology, it doesn't make sense.
For all the people who stick up for Russia just to be against Ukraine, think about that.
How can a communist be working for Shiite Islamic fundamentalists and then for the gangster regime in Moscow? But if you think of it from what is the underlying agenda, which is the common purpose is to destroy America, it makes perfect sense.
Remember, Russia is no ally to freedom. Russia is an ally to Russia and Russia's interests.
Senior Workers' World leader Teresa Gutierrez is very clear on where the anti-Trump movement is really intended to lead.
Comrades, I ask you today, is our decisive link the struggle against Donald Trump? Let this conference answer that question today, throughout the day, and in the streets on January the 20th. And I finally, comrades, I believe with all my heart and soul that this is the party that will lead the revolution to take the White House down, that will make the United States of America a socialist country. The young people in this room will see it. The young people in this room will build it. So all power to the youth, all power to the revolution. Black Lives Matter. Si se puede.
Female commie Danny DeVito. These people are funded and controlled by the Democratic Party and the tax-exempt foundations. They are their useful idiots. Now I want to focus on what Marxism is like whenever it comes to fruition, and I want to take a look at China's cultural war because it's very similar to America's cultural war. So we're going to look at that, and then we're going to contrast it with freedom and liberty afterwards.
Initially, when communists come to power, and that doesn't matter where, Let it be in Russia, in Poland, in Cuba, in Nicaragua, it doesn't matter, in China. Initially, they destroy about 10% of population, and that's very specific. This is used not just to kill enemies, they're not enemies, it's to restructure the fabric of society. It's a social engineering. Top intellectuals, best workers, best engineers, they would kill them all. And then they will try to restructure the new society.
Hang at least 100 kulaks, execute the hostages, do it in such a way that people for hundreds of miles around will see and tremble. Lenin.
In the countryside, the changes were just as profound. For centuries, most peasants had struggled to survive hardship and poverty. During the revolution, Mao had won peasant support with promises of a better life. Now he gave them land.
As a free people, it's really hard for us to comprehend just how insane these policies were.
Party officials told peasants to seize property from their landlords.
It was fierce. The whole village, hundreds of people, came beating drums. They dragged me to the meeting ground and wanted to beat me. I said, don't hit me. I know my family has exploited the people for generations. I'll give you my house, land, everything. After they discussed it, they labeled me an enlightened son of a landlord family.
And remember, the Marxists we just saw were in favor of Maoism.
They let me keep my house, although there wasn't much left in it. But in fact, I did well. Many people died.
It's like his experience was the best possible outcome.
Officials encouraged peasants to humiliate and beat their landlords. Often, the violence went much further. Across China, hundreds of thousands of landlords were killed. Now it began a series of smaller campaigns against people inside China, people Mao called enemies without guns. Party officials encouraged people to act as informers, using special letterboxes. The Jiang family had one of many small businesses still operating in Wuhan.
My in-laws were capitalists. They were told to report all their property to the government. So they made an inventory of everything in the store. Later, there was a struggle meeting. The shop assistants tied up my mother-in-law because they didn't like her. They yelled at her. My brother-in-law got impatient and said, "We don't have anything more. You keep saying we have more, but we don't." Then they tied him up too, saying he had a bad attitude. What we used as our dinner table was actually a bench, this long. They told her to kneel on it. It's very hard to kneel on a bench like that. If you bend just a little, you fall. You have to stay very straight to kneel on it. They kept us there until 11 at night. They really couldn't get any more out of us.
Struggle sessions, and if we continue to do nothing in this country, that's what we'll end up with.
Thousands were jailed or executed. People with money, with foreign connections, or with ties to the previous regime.
Always remember, when they say people with money, it's usually not people with money, and it's usually people they just disagree with.
The communists crushed all potential political opposition.
Now let's turn our focus to Russia's Bolshevik Revolution.
In February 1917, a spontaneous demonstration broke out, a strike against rationing led by women textile workers.
Pay very close attention to what happens in this next part.
From the front, Nicholas ordered force to break up the demonstration. But this time the soldiers refused to open fire. All at once, the fragile nature of autocracy lay exposed.
When the soldiers won't fire, the king is naked.
The Tsar found himself with neither the support nor the means to impress his will.
We have decided to renounce the throne of Russia, to unburden ourselves of the supreme power.
In the weeks and months that followed, Russia began to break down. The Duma, the parliament, set up a provisional government, promising to hold elections soon. But revolution could not be avoided. Workers' soviets or councils urged soldiers and workers to take power and property from factory owners and landlords. Across Russia, the rich found their estates pillaged.
Remember, rich kulaks were considered people with 2 bedrooms or 2 horses. So no, they weren't rich.
Eight months later, the Bolsheviks stormed the Winter Palace and took control from the provisional government. And those of the old order fled for their lives.
Now let's look at China's collectivization.
He ordered the country to move to the next stage of socialism, to collectivization. But for most peasants, this was going too far. In collectives, private property was abolished. People had to give up their animals, their tools, and their land. Party officials put intense pressure on families to join.
By then, people were unhappy. They weren't comfortable forming a collective with the whole village. Some villagers didn't get on with others. My father was quite well off, so he didn't want to join either. I was a party official in the village. I told him if I weren't an official, I wouldn't insist he join. If you didn't join, you wouldn't look good in front of your neighbors. With my persuasion and the example of others, he gave in. But he joined with reluctance. His income was quite high. It went down after he joined, so he was unhappy.
He put the party before his father.
Within months, all of China's 600 million peasants were working in huge collectives. For the first time in history, the farm output of the entire nation was under government control. The government decided how much grain the peasants could keep. The rest had to be sold at low prices to the state.
The grain ration for the peasants was very low, not enough. Plus, you had to obey the leadership. You had to fulfill the state quota. State first, then the people.
Peasants complained about the policies.
They said, we can't keep one extra ear of grain for ourselves. Do you think this is fair? I said, it's not fair. So I wrote to the provincial leadership. Things couldn't go on like this. No matter how much you grew, you still had to give it to the state. You couldn't eat it. The province sent people down to investigate.
They were going to find out that these commie policies were ruining everything, right?
They saw things were just the way I said, but they couldn't solve it. It was a big problem.
Couldn't have been communism.
Collectives did not make the peasants better off, nor did they increase production. Mao still had to find a way to finance his vision of an industrial China. The communists controlled most intellectual life. Plays and films had to follow strict guidelines.
Watch how they trick everyone into telling on themselves.
Mao saw that this control was stifling potentially useful new ideas. He was also disturbed by the emergence of a new elite in the party itself. In 1956, Mao decided to encourage constructive criticism of the party. He called for 100 flowers to bloom in the arts and 100 schools of thought to contend in science.
I was all for the slogan of letting 100 flowers bloom. We all felt that we had really started to have democracy. Soon, all the walls in Beijing University were covered with big posters. People expressed their points of view and asked the Communist Party for changes.
Yu Beijian called many high school teachers unqualified. Shang Dashi complained medical research was falling behind. More and more people criticized party corruption and inefficiency.
Committee members and leaders at all levels were criticized by ordinary people. They had quite a tough time. So they did not like 100 flowers. They felt as if they were punching bags. They were not happy.
Under pressure from the party, Mao reversed himself. In June 1957, he published an article calling the people who had spoken out enemies and rightists. Mao appointed Deng Xiaoping to lead the anti-rightist movement.
I was supposed to have committed 29 crimes. One was that I supported the policy of letting 100 flowers bloom. It was Mao Zedong himself who started the policy. How could it be a crime? But it was.
Nobody ever realized it was just a way to draw out people who weren't 100% in line with the party.
The rightists were denounced in front of their colleagues in struggle meetings. Professor Ge Peiqi was criticized in this meeting at the People's University in Beijing.
And stuff like this happens in America, in American colleges, on the campus. It happens often. Look what they did to Brett Weinstein and his wife and other professors.
Ge Peiqi was my neighbor. He was already done for. That's what we called it. I saw his youngest child, who was about 5 or 6 months old. His nurse had quit. The baby was crawling outside the building under the burning sun. I felt sorry for him and picked him up. Some people said, "You shouldn't do that. Ge Peiqi is a bad person. Why are you holding his child? You'll get into trouble."
Shaming people for helping innocent babies.
They meant well. I said, "The baby hasn't done anything wrong."
Ge Peiqi's family was ostracized for years. Ge Peiqi himself spent the next 2 decades doing hard labor.
I had been in the revolutionary ranks for so many years. At the meeting, I was the most senior person there, but I was finished. I suddenly realized that I had fallen from the sky down to the earth. I could never get up again. I was a rightist, and I was kicked out.
In an internal party document, Mao estimated that about 10% of the people were rightists. Local officials interpreted this to mean they had to find 10 rightists among every 100 people.
Now they got to destroy another 10%.
In 1958, Mao launched his most ambitious campaign to date, the Great Leap Forward. His goal was to make China the industrial equal of Western nations in just 15 years. His method was to mobilize the entire country to work day and night by promising a better future. A commune encompassed many villages with thousands of families. Each day was strictly regimented, and family life was virtually abolished. Children were placed in communal nurseries while their parents worked around the clock.
State-owned children.
People ate in the fields or in communal dining halls. To increase industrial output, communes were ordered to make steel.
The slogan was, to overtake England and catch up with America. The idea was that if everybody worked hard, and everywhere in the country people refined steel, then we would catch up very soon.
People collected walks, pots, bed frames, and tools, anything made of iron or steel.
Spoiler alert, it was a failure also, like most
they built
commie
small
projects.
Furnaces to melt them. The biggest challenge was to keep the furnaces fueled.
We burned tables, chairs, window frames. And finally, we even opened old coffins and used the wood. They really stank. We kept the fires burning day and night. And for convenience, we built work sheds close to the furnaces. One day I worked very late and I was totally exhausted. We had separate sheds for men and women. But I was so tired I couldn't tell the difference. I just walked into a shed, lay down, and fell asleep. When I woke the next morning, I found I was in the men's shed. Of course it was all right. Nobody cared. All we cared about was making as much steel as we could.
At night, you could see many furnaces along the railroad. Fire shot out of the furnaces. This made people excited. China was going through a great change. China was becoming a very rich and strong country.
Because of state ownership and slave labor.
All this seemed to have happened overnight. Mao was very pleased.
But the steel people made was useless.
We used it to make pots of all sizes. But when people heated them, they cracked and leaked. If only we had the equipment to make good steel, but we didn't. We only had people. Our methods were very primitive. Of course we didn't make good steel. People were unhappy, but nobody dared say anything. The result was that everything made of iron and steel was taken from every family and was made useless. We had no tools left to use.
While the government called on everyone to make steel, they also wanted to increase farm output.
How could we increase the grain harvest? People said that if you did close planting and used more fertilizer, you would definitely increase output.
You have to be an idealistic commie to come up with stuff this dumb.
People got carried away. They were hot-headed.
Yeah, it's a mind virus.
From Mao Zedong and the Central Party Committee down to leaders at all levels, everyone was full of enthusiasm.
Red fever.
During the Great Leap Forward, we believed miracles could happen. There was a saying, the corn will grow higher the more you desire. Communes and schools reported their wonderful news to the party. If one commune said they could turn out 150 tons an acre, another one would say their target was 180 tons. Each commune or school would promise a higher amount until the last school gave their highest figure. Our school set the target of 470 tons an acre. We dug a hole, something like a swimming pool. We thought if we put all the fertilizer in it, we would achieve our target. Then we poured the seeds in, which built up into a layer about this thick. There was a photograph in the People's Daily that showed the wheat in a field supporting the weight of children.
Some leaders of the Central Party Committee were so happy that they put this photo on their desks at work. Most people believed it.
We were surprised to see that photo and wondered how it could be possible. But because we were city people, we couldn't be sure it was a fake.
Nah, the party would never do that.
When I went with Mao to the villages, I really did see so much grain in the fields, so much rice. The yields were so high. At the time, I thought everything was true.
After the anti-rightist campaign, few dared to ask questions.
Only one teacher spoke out. How thick would the wheat be if we did produce 470 tons? Immediately, he was accused of being a rightist and not believing in the party.
Later, I learned it was all fake. The peasants were putting on a show for us. They moved grain from other places and put it all in one field. It was all a show for Mao.
The state took the grain accordingly. It was sent to feed the cities, repay Soviet debts, or left to rot in warehouses. Peasants across China were beginning to starve. Officials continued to demand more grain than the peasants could give. The Great Leap Forward continued through 1960. Millions of peasants were starving.
Old peasants said in a fury, "No, grain comes from the blood and sweat of peasants. It doesn't grow on the backs of intellectuals. Who do they think they're fooling?" In wartime, we protected them and saved their lives. Now we provide them with food and clothing. They have full stomachs, and still they come to cheat us. Don't they have a conscience?
My aunt's family was a typical big family in the countryside, with several generations living together. There were 36 people altogether. During the 3 years of famine, one died after another. Eventually, only 3 people were left alive. At first, when someone died, they would take the body and bury it. Later, they didn't have the strength to take the bodies out. They could only look at them. They watched the bodies being eaten by rats, and their eyeballs dug out. People didn't even have the strength to chase the rats away.
Absolutely horrific, and this is the ideology they're pushing in America, which created policies like
The
this.
famine was very severe and widespread, but newspapers did not report it at all. People only knew that their local area was suffering. To keep the news from spreading, peasants were not allowed to leave their areas, even to beg.
Just like the kulaks and the same outcome, as we'll shortly see.
At first, peasants ate everything they had at home. Then they ate Genyan earth. It's a kind of white clay. There's a legend in the village, passed down from generation to generation. It says that this clay was provided by Old Mother Genyan, who sympathized with the poor people. People would eat it during the famine because it was very fine. But still, it was hard to swallow. At first, the peasants could swallow a little. But after 4 or 5 days, it destroyed their intestines, and they died. After eating all the grass roots and tree bark, they ate the earth.
Imagine this kind of suffering, and it always happens under communism.
The famine lasted 3 years. An estimated 30 million people died.
Most historians say close to 40 million, actually.
Mao's revolution, fought to give the Chinese people a better life, had helped create the largest famine in history. In 1961, Peng Dehuai, a lone voice, wrote, "Grain scattered across the ground. Potato leaves withered. Strong young people have gone to make steel. Only children and old women reap the crops. How will they eat next year? Please, think of the people."
Now let's look at communist Russian policies and their outcomes.
According to various sources, during the Holocaust, between 6 million and 10 million people were killed. Approximately the same number died during the Golodomor. These people were not killed during a military operation. These were civilians who were murdered by the Nazis and the communists deliberately. Each of these large-scale tragedies has its distinct characteristics. The Nazis and the Bolsheviks first created the image of an enemy. And then they developed an ideology and legislation. And finally, they began to physically eliminate them. Despite the outward differences, German fascism and Soviet communism acted with the same methods and, of course, got the same result. The machine of death, to which human life was worth absolutely nothing.
Millions dead were a statistic to Stalin.
There was terrible hunger. God forgive that anyone should have to live through this again. 2,000 people died in our village over 3 months. Just 3 months. There were cases when neighbors killed an 8-year-old girl and ate her. Even parents used to eat their own children. It was horrible. From the report, Famine and the Ukrainian Situation by the Italian consul in Kharkov, from the archives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Italy, dated May 31st, 1933. Comrade Frenkel, a member of the board of the GPU, shared confidential information that every night in Kharkov, about 250 people dying of starvation were gathered. Those who do not yet have swollen bellies were sent to the barracks at Cold Mountain, where there were about 8,000 people, mostly children, in the barns on the Strea in agony. The swollen ones are sent by freight trains into the countryside 50 to 60 kilometers from the city, because there no one will see what becomes of them. Conclusion: the current disaster will cause Ukraine to be colonized by Russians. In the future, perhaps in the nearest period, Ukraine and Ukrainians will no longer be discussed. No one will ask about Ukraine. In fact, Ukraine will become a Russian province.
These are from real Russian archives.
Stalin set the task of taking away Ukraine's national identity and forming a new Ukrainian Soviet people. The imperial authorities understood that if they did not stifle Ukraine, nationalism there would grow so strong that the Russian government would not be able to do anything about it later and keep Ukraine under its influence. That is why they decided to kill a significant portion of the population and weaken national sentiments to make it unable to rise and fight for independence. The main attack was supposed to hit the Ukrainian countryside, which actively resisted the Soviet regime and maintained the fight until the end. They attacked the Ukrainian peasantry on 2 fronts. The Bolsheviks considered the peasantry as a class a relic of capitalism. They were problematic because they maintained property, and as representatives of the Ukrainian nation, they retained their ethnic identity. Peasants lived by centuries-old traditions spanning language, culture, traditions, morals, and rituals. Everything was preserved in its original and wholesome form. That's why Moscow counted on hitting the villages hard, and by that, eradicating the Ukrainian ethnicity. To subjugate the peasants, the Bolsheviks developed a collectivization program, which made it possible to control the countryside.
They killed all these Ukrainians and replaced them with Russian people.
The active phase of collectivization began in late 1929. First, the communists aimed to eliminate their main opponents, the rich peasants, the so-called kulaks. On Stalin's orders, prosperous peasants had to be destroyed as a class. Fighting the kulaks turned into a struggle with the peasantry as a whole. The farmer should be a rural proletariat, which had no ownership. The Bolsheviks were resisted most of all from Ukrainian villages. The repression was catastrophic. If a peasant had more than one cow, he was considered a kulak. Often kulaks were called farmers who did not want to go to the collective. This category of people were common in the villages. Peasants were robbed of all their possessions, cattle, tools, land. Arrests and evictions began in the villages. The thieving pressure on the villages began in 1929. If farmers or their unions refused to join the kolkhoz, the collective farm, their houses were destroyed. People were thrown out into the snow in the winter. If you don't want to join the collective farm and don't like the Soviet government, you are our enemies, they said, and simply threw them out.
Barely getting by middle-class people were considered kulaks.
Nikolai Ivanovich Brukhanov, born 1923, a native of the village Berestovenka in the Krasnograd-Kharkov region. Our family consisted of 9 people, of whom 4 were children. By the standards of the time, we lived well. There was bread, and for the bread, in fact, we worked from dawn till dusk. And suddenly, collectivization. My grandfather Pavel and the entire family were labeled as rich and dispossessed. Everything was taken away, even my toys. We were not only penniless, but with no shelter. Everything was destroyed. The wood from our house was used to heat the school. The family dispersed to the relatives. In Ukraine, a special system was created that punished the entire people. That is why 10 times as many people died in Ukraine. While in other places, officials merely confiscated grain from peasants as a part of the production plan, the Ukrainian villages were given natural fines to cover the debt to the state. This penalty didn't only suggest the removal of grain, but all food. They were stripped of all meat, vegetables, and fruit. Even cooked dinners were taken from homes. The Kuban region, where ethnic Ukrainians accounted for 85% of the total population, suffered the same situation. They took away everything that was edible. They took away clothes, shoes, and so on. Just imagine, a unit enters a house and sees a soup pot on the stove. They took the pot, carried it outside, and broke it against the ground so that it could not be eaten anymore.
This is what they always do to rural folk.
So they destroyed all the available food.
Hence the name death by hunger.
То есть уничтожали всю пищу, которую можно было, потребить людям.
Fyodor Pachenko, born 1923, citizen of Pankovka, Volkovsky region, Kharkov. In 1932, profit groups from the communists and Komsomol members arrived to conduct procurements. They went from house to house, poked in the ground looking for hidden grain. They took a pot of beans from us. They dug and found potatoes in our neighbor's yard. They took it and buried the old man himself. Think where the bread was taken. They went into the house, forced them to feed them. They had vodka with them, were drinking and walking. When they later dug up the old man, he was in shock and soon died. Cold, poor man. Special units were made up of poor people and were led by the secret police. They were supposed to go through all the villages and take away all the non-grain food. In fact, there was no more bread left at the time.
Но в принципе хлеба уже не было, и Сталин знал, что хлеба не было, поскольку
Stalin knew that there was no bread left because the secret police had brushed through earlier in November and December of 1932 when they found and removed all the remaining hidden grains meant for sowing. So there were no grains left, and the operation conducted by the secret police was a pure hunger terror technique. In the village, it became impossible to buy food because no one sold it. The empty village shops closed their doors. Cities sold products only for tickets. The first victims of the famine were cats and dogs. Then came rats, frogs, and mice. When they were eaten too, the peasants began to eat leaves, bark, and roots. They ate dead cattle, which laid along the roads, cooked horns and leather belts. They ate rotten potatoes and beets, which remained after the harvest on the collective fields. We ate everything possible. We gathered leaves and boiled them. My mother made mini cakes from rotten potatoes.
Policies that arose from the depths of hell.
Late January, early February 1933, most of the Ukrainian countryside was dying. People dying of starvation first swelled, then lost consciousness and died. The first victims of the famine were the children and the elderly. People were swollen, terribly swollen. Children had swollen stomachs. It was a terrifying sight. The dead were all collected in cellars and buried in one grave.
Де погреба такі були позавалювані, так ото погреба так звалювали все.
It was a form of punishment. They used extreme punishment to finally make everyone understand that these people are serious. They will not joke. Everything they do is serious, and the only way out is death. These harsh methods were supposed to teach them, you see. When hunger hit people hard, the Bolsheviks saw the advantage in it. Because everything was somehow done by itself. People could not find a way out of this deadlock.
This was absolutely a genocide.
To survive, people escaped to the cities. However, the Bolsheviks did not allow Ukrainian farmers to leave the villages. January 22nd, 1933, the Soviet government issues a decree that carries out a deliberate policy to destroy the population of Ukraine. The Cheka receives an order to stop and return any fleeing Ukrainians to their places of residence. In areas affected by famine, it is prohibited to sell train tickets. Troops guard the villages, and armed soldiers line Ukraine's external borders.
See, China copied the Russians.
Russian farmers had a chance to leave their villages. There was Siberia and other regions. They could save themselves. There was nothing like that in Ukraine. All the possibilities to leave were cut off. It demonstrates that there was an anti-Ukrainian implication. No doubt. Pyotr Doroshko, born 1926 in the village of Zimnivusky. I only remember that it was very quiet. Birds were not singing. The dogs ate. Hunger. I went to the well for water because the rest of the members of my family were laying for several days. Grandfather had died. Corpses lay in some places on the way to the well. I went around them even though I had no power at all. Suddenly I heard a scream. I lifted my head. I looked around and there was noise around the well. I looked more closely and saw a woman grab a child, and the child screamed, "Mom, do not!" and tried to run away from her mother, but the woman grabbed the girl and jumped into the well, holding another infant. By the beginning of spring, Kharkov and the Kharkov region were in the worst situation. Fratsinya Karetsuba, citizen of village New Berluk, Kharkov district. One woman in our village had 8 children. Her husband died in 1929. Through the winter, they ate soup with pickled beets and then decided not to give anything to the little ones to eat. May the Lord take them so that the oldest could have more to eat. They put them into the oven and said, "Sit down, be quiet, not to hear your voice, or you'll go outside in the cold weather." Van Dodi Van Peter brought their children and threw them at the station. If you're quiet, you too will drive to the station, or worse, they'll put you in a hot frying pan. Children were crying quietly so not to end up in the stove. In spite of this appalling situation, the Soviet authorities did not recognize the existence of the hunger. The communist press reported that the rumors about the famine were spread by kulaks and their supporters. In order to fight the Soviets, they deliberately starve and die, it was said.
Communists will make it illegal to even say there's a famine.
Bolshevik brigades went to seize seeds and crops, even when almost no one was left living in the village. In winter 1933, the communists took an additional 104 million tons of Ukrainian grain.
They really wanted to starve them people to death.
Famine in Ukrainian villages turned to cannibalism. People went crazy with hunger, exhaustion, and turned each other into food. Children were often the victims of cannibals. During that period, they were the most defenseless. Because of their naivety, they easily became sacrifices. One eyewitness said that his neighbor lured a 5-year-old girl to his house and killed her. When they entered the room, all that was left of the child was bones and colored ribbons on braids. They ate not only strangers, but members of their own family. A mother cooked a younger child to save the elders. The children ate their parents, who died of starvation. There were times when the market sold human meat. In winter and spring 1933, only human meat was available in Ukrainian villages. The Soviet regime had left people only their neighbors and children to eat. There are records of a mother methodically killing her daughters aged 2 to 7.
Методически уничтожать 3 своих дочерей, там от 2 до 7 лет.
They ate the youngest one all together, while the eldest children saw what their mother was doing. When the oldest girl refused to eat her sister, then it was the middle one's turn, and the older girl knew that she would be next.
Is this really what we want in America? We should be fighting this at all costs and keeping it as far away from our children as humanly possible.
Such details could only be known by a morbid coroner. How the woman dismembered the bodies, took out the heart, the liver. These were not simple memories which could be doubted by some skeptics in this tragedy. These were the facts of 1933. They were recorded by the State Political Directorate. Alexander Harchenko, born 1928, village Minkovka. Next to us lived Makar Lisovin. He had 2 girls, one my age and another younger one. In front of me, the father brought the older one out of the house, grabbed her pigtail, and cut off her head. He then buried her head and chopped her body, tossing the pieces into a large bowl. Lisovin and his wife had eaten the second daughter too. I told everything to my mother. She forbade me to even approach the neighbor's house.
These were the daily consequences of communism and its insane policies. Vera Voinova, born 1920, Kharkov.
In the spring of 1933, the Voronins, friends of my parents, came with us to Kharkov from the village of Huta. They were emaciated, depressed, and without children. After the soup my mother made, the guests felt themselves unwell. When they felt well, my parents asked them, "Where are your children?" Without hesitation, they replied, "We ate them." "What do you mean you ate them?" We could not believe our ears. One by one, we ate the little ones and then the older ones. The oldest said, "If you eat them all, eat me as well." And their toes were delicious.
It's like something out of a horror movie.
Only members of the state political directorate and the police had the right to visit Ukrainian villages, especially the ones that were blacklisted. There were such villages. It meant that the whole population of the village died of hunger. A black flag appeared there instead of the Soviet red flag. There were 50,000 such villages, according to the preliminary data of the All-Soviet Union Commission on Resettlement of Peasants to Ukraine from the Smolensk, Gorky, and other regions of the Russian Federation.
Allegedly, communism is the reason he has that lump on his head, too.
Из Горьковской области, из других областей Российской Федерации в Украину около 50 тысяч.
Nobody knows exactly how many people died during the Golodomor. According to one version, about 2 million people perished. Some researchers put the number at 5 million, although there is another version that between 1932 and 1933, 8 million to 10 million people died. But the fact remains that the number of victims is not in the thousands, but the millions. At the time, Stalin said that the death of one person was a tragedy. The death of thousands of people was statistics. So that the Golodomor would not be just a statistic, an obelisk was built in central Kiev, reminding people of the horror of those years. The Ukrainian movement, the forces that existed in Ukraine, and the basis of Ukrainian statehood were eradicated by that awful action. It was then supplemented by mass repressions against the Ukrainian intelligentsia that began in 1933. Its members were literally slaughtered starting from 1933. There were mass arrests, protests, court hearings, and the Ukrainization of the Solovki, the region where the Ukrainians were deported to. They completed their goals. They removed all the independent and independent-minded people to bring up slavery and servility. They brought up the wish to extricate oneself from certain situations and live under a certain regime. They brought up a completely different human being. So I have no doubts that it was clearly genocide.
1959 and 1961, an estimated 30 million people died of hunger. Officially, the communist government blamed the catastrophe on floods and drought. But in party meetings, they admitted that the famine was largely created by their own policies. Their efforts to rebuild the country would spark a struggle inside the party. A struggle that would engulf the Chinese people in chaos and terror.
Now comes the Cultural Revolution, which is similar to our Cultural Revolution in many ways, which you'll see. One thing we won't see here is Han privilege, but to understand Han privilege, just think of white privilege in America. Hey,
Mao Zedong was the head of the Communist Party, the man who had instigated the disastrous policies of the Great Leap Forward. But no one would ever dare hold him responsible. Mao's reputation remained untarnished.
Yeah, dictators of nations tend to have an unblemished record.
During this time, Mao had chosen to withdraw from day-to-day government. Liu Shaoqi took over.
Although people respected Liu Shaoqi, and he had great authority, he could not compare with Mao. I remember after Mao resigned as head of state, the People's Congress elected Liu Shaoqi to succeed him. We had parades to celebrate. But people shouted, "Long live Chairman Mao." Not a single person shouted, "Long live Chairman Liu."
Liu was a veteran revolutionary and one of the most conscientious and talented in the party. He worked with Zhou Enlai and Deng Xiaoping to rebuild the country. They had to do it without foreign help. China's communist government had long viewed America as its principal enemy. Now, as U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War escalated, so did anti-American rhetoric. By 1966, China was increasingly prosperous and the world's fifth nuclear power. But Mao was more and more dissatisfied. He did not control party policy, and he felt that Liu Shaoqi and the other leaders were betraying the revolution.
Mao disagreed with people like Liu Shaoqi on building the economy. Zhou Enlai and Liu wanted to curb radical policies. Mao wasn't happy. Mao thought that curbing radicalism was wrong.
For Mao, communism could be achieved only through radical means, through continuing revolution, a never-ending process of struggle and change. He decided that the Communist Party itself, the party he had led for more than 30 years, was the main obstacle to his vision of revolution.
Constant revolution, huh? I wonder who that's going to end up affecting.
In May 1966, Mao began an attack on the party. Through the columns of China's main newspaper, he called on young people to attack party officials and replace them with true revolutionaries. Mao Zedong had unleashed the great proletarian cultural revolution.
For the first time since 1949, our supreme leader, Chairman Mao, a godlike figure, called on people at the very bottom of society. People like us students with no work and no profession. He told us to rebel against party officials.
Turned college kids into his personal army.
This had a tremendous impact on us.
It was said there were people who were against Chairman Mao. We felt it was time for us to give our blood and our lives to protect Chairman Mao.
He mobilizes the cult.
Young people took to the streets. They wrote wall posters attacking their teachers and party officials. Within days, schools and universities were in turmoil. Having launched the Cultural Revolution, Mao left Beijing. Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping were left to manage the growing disorder. They asked Mao for instructions, but he gave them none.
Oh, go start revolution. I go work on backstroke.
On July 16th, 1966, Mao staged a huge media event, swimming in the Yangtze River. It was a signal to the nation that Mao, aged 73, was vigorous and in command. 2 days later, he returned to the capital.
A meeting was held in the Great Hall of the People with students from Beijing University and other colleges. At the meeting, Liu Shaoqi, Deng Xiaoping, and Zhou Enlai were sitting on the stage.
Unknown to the participants, Mao was listening backstage. Dr. Li sat next to him.
Liu Shaoqi described how the Cultural Revolution started. He said, "We veteran revolutionaries have encountered new problems, and we don't know how to deal with them." Mao immediately said, "I hear you. What veteran revolutionaries? You're an old counter-revolutionary." My heart sank. It was already very clear that in Mao's eyes, Liu Shaoqi was no longer the head of state, no longer a communist. He was an old counter-revolutionary, Mao had already condemned him. I knew Liu Shaoqi would have no way out. No way out.
Within weeks, Mao reordered the party hierarchy. Deng Xiaoping was demoted to number 6. Liu Shaoqi even lower to number 8. Lin Biao replaced him.
Chairman Mao says, Marxism consists of thousands of truths, but they all boil down to one phrase. It's right to rebel.
Students banded together to carry out Mao's orders. They called themselves Red Guards.
Here they call themselves Antifa, BLM, the Weather Underground.
On August 18th, 1966, Mao began a series of public appearances, greeting millions of young people in Tiananmen Square. Donning the armband of the Red Guards, Mao gave them his blessing.
We saw Mao wave to us. He said something, but we couldn't hear clearly. Later we learned that he said we should carry on the Cultural Revolution to the end. We felt it was the greatest honor of our lives to see Mao in person.
With Mao's approval, the Red Guards traveled for free around the country to gain revolutionary experience. In September 1966, schools did not open for the academic year.
This was the first chance we had to break away from our parents, to do whatever we wanted.
The first morning we were in high spirits. We sang revolutionary songs as we walked. We walked the whole day. The second day we had blisters on our feet and we were exhausted. Army trucks often passed us on the way. The Liberation Army men would say, "Chairman Mao's Red Guards, where are you going?" We answered, "We're going to Beijing to see Chairman Mao and to get revolutionary experience." Then they would say, "Good, our truck is empty, we'll give you a lift." We would answer, "Thank you, Liberation Army men, we want to walk to Beijing. We'll spread Mao Zedong thought and get revolutionary experience on the way." The 13 of us walked and walked for many days.
It's not even a religion, it's a cult. Communists still to this day defend Chairman Mao.
On October 1st, 1966, National Day, the rallies with Mao reached their most extravagant level.
Long live our great leader, Chairman Mao.
Lin Biao, now called Mao's closest comrade in arms, led the ceremony.
Pay attention to what he wanted to abolish.
Mao encouraged the Red Guards to attack Western influences and to destroy the four olds: old ideas, old culture, old customs, old habits. Without this destruction, he said, socialism cannot be achieved. The Red Guards tore down street signs and put up new revolutionary names. They ransacked museums, libraries, and temples. They searched and looted people's homes.
At first they took my books, together with a bookcase. The second time they searched for money. There were things that would get me in trouble. Later they took the sewing machine and sofa, even the desk. There was no reason for it. My children were scared to death, shaking with fear.
They terrorized citizens all over China, and they also terrorized old communists.
Groups of Red Guards roamed the countryside, urging peasants to attack local officials. They came to Wugong in November 1966. Some villagers seized the chance to take revenge against officials who for years had given the best grain to the state.
They criticized old Shu. They said, "You old woman, you sifted and selected until there wasn't a single husk in the grain. You delivered such good grain to the state. You didn't want to leave any for us to eat, did you?" Several people went up to the platform and put a tall paper hat, it was at least this tall, on Old Shoe's head. They held her by the scruff of the neck and paraded her through the streets.
Attacking old woman peasants for the policies that Mao put in.
The violence soon turned against traditional targets of class struggle, like the former landlord's son, Li Mao-shou.
I was tied up, hung up, and beaten up. One afternoon I passed out 4 times. I stopped breathing. Later, they didn't even have to hit me. My breathing would stop when they hung me up. That's how bad it got.
Chairman Mao had said, "A revolution is an insurrection, an act of violence by which one class overthrows another. It's not a dinner party." We had to be rough and harsh and wild.
In my class, there was a student whose grandfather had owned a big fabric store, so he was a capitalist. I heard that everyone was to go to their house to criticize him. I got there late, and by the time I arrived, the capitalist had been beaten to death. I remember that his head was all swollen and dark and bruised. I didn't look for long, and then we all left. But later I learned that this capitalist was killed after my classmates got there. Other students and probably Red Guards from the neighborhood also got involved. All those people beat him to death, including his own granddaughter, my classmate.
His own granddaughter.
I didn't think much about it then because this kind of thing happened a lot. But years later, I thought about it many times, and I wanted to find an answer. The question was very difficult. It was, if I had not arrived late, what would I have done? Would I have beaten him? He was a capitalist, but at the same time he was a man, an old man. I have never been able to answer this question.
Horrifying. In 2020, radicals operated under similar directives by politicians.
The Radical Cultural Revolution Group dominated the government. Members included Lin Biao and Mao's wife, Jiang Qing. She often appeared as Mao's spokesperson and had gained great power. Her calls for violent struggle were immediately obeyed by millions of Red Guards. Moderate leaders, repulsed by the fanaticism, felt closer to Zhou Enlai. Zhou's role in the Cultural Revolution is ambiguous. He tried to moderate events, but in the end he always sided with Mao. He tried to protect people, but his power had limits. Many close to him would soon be brutally attacked.
People from the Cultural Revolution Group told us to drag out Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping and overthrow them.
Mao had already removed the guns in the hands of the citizens at this time, so they had really no means to protect themselves. It's either you're under Mao's blessing or you're under his curse. And even his blessing is like hell.
Crowds of people filled the street. Loudspeakers were blasting towards Zhongnan High, demanding that Liu be handed over to be struggled against. It was very revolutionary, very fashionable to drag him out.
Zhou tried to send the students away. He warned Liu and his wife, Wang Guangmei, to stay inside the leader's compound at Zhongnan High. In April 1967, Red Guards tricked Wang into leaving, saying one of her daughters had had an accident. They dragged her in front of this crowd. They dressed her as a whore and repeatedly humiliated her. Later, Wang Guangmei was jailed. She spent 12 years in solitary confinement. Deng Xiaoping was struggled against and exiled to a remote village. Liu Shaoqi was attacked and beaten.
They always come back to eat their own. This is what they do. Now, eventually, what do you think they're going to do to the Red Guard when they're done using them? As mentioned in part 1, after they use their useful idiots, they always come back to eat their own.
He was kept under house arrest for 2 years. Then, weakened by torture and cancer, no longer able to eat, speak, or use his hands, he was wrapped in a sheet and flown to this remote prison. Weeks later, Liu Shaoqi, China's head of state for 10 years, died, naked and alone. In 1967, the Cultural Revolution entered a new stage, factional warfare. The Red Guards had never been a unified movement. At first, only students with good communist backgrounds were admitted. The millions of young people left out formed their own groups and called themselves rebels.
We organized our own Red Guards. We called ourselves the Red Guards of Mao Zedong thought. We were part of the rebels. We made armbands the same as the others. You say you're defending Chairman Mao? Okay, so am I. You're making revolution? So am I.
A civil war amongst the Red Guard.
At first, the rebels and Red Guards clashed over ideology. Then they fought for local power. Soon, millions of workers and soldiers joined the conflicts. In Shanghai, the rebel group, led by colleagues of Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, overthrew the local party committee. Mao immediately supported the rebels. Now that the revolutionary forces in Shanghai have risen up, he declared, there is hope for China. Across the country, rebel groups responded by trying to seize power from local party authorities.
Each faction had its own weapons. They robbed military arsenals, and army units supported one faction or another. They gave their side weapons. I really wanted to have a gun.
Civil War. Again and again, Zhou Enlai, on Mao's behalf, ordered the different factions to stop fighting. But they did not. Finally, in July 1968, Mao turned on the Red Guards and rebels, personally ordering them to disband. This time they obeyed, as soldiers took over schools and colleges and terrorized the students into submission.
A few people called the dictatorship team came in. The person who was declared a criminal was dragged out of his seat. Then 2 from the dictatorship team would hit the person's legs with their rods so that he would kneel. Then they'd handcuff you and announce your crimes. They shoved your head down. The rest of the audience would shout slogans and you were dragged away. It was scary.
This guy's very animated.
You never knew who would be next.
By the end of 1968, rigid conformity and repression ruled people's lives as never before. The army, under Lin Biao, pushed the cult of Mao to new heights. People had to report all their thoughts to Mao twice a day. Twice a day, wherever they were, they danced the loyalty dance.
Please don't. Please don't do the loyalty dance. No, not you. Please don't be 75 and still be doing the loyalty dance.
我们衷心祝福你老人家，万寿无疆，万寿无疆，万寿无疆。
I was a little disgusted with the cult of Mao, and I said a few things.
That's a quick way to get killed.
Lin Biao had said every sentence Chairman Mao said was the truth. I said nobody can say everything that is the truth. So I was labeled a reactionary student. At school, they held several criticism meetings against me. What was most unbearable, and even today still makes me uncomfortable, was that none of my friends would speak to me. I became totally isolated.
We heard older people talk about Jiang Qing and knew they really looked down on her. So we made up jokes. And we said the chaos of the Cultural Revolution was due to Jiang Qing, and Mao should divorce her. Jiang Qing's group heard about what we said.
For his casual remarks, Zhang Longlong spent the next 10 years in jail. At the end of 1968, Mao started a campaign to have city youth, former Red Guards and rebels, re-educated by the peasants. Millions of families were wrenched apart as young people were sent to spend years in China's most remote regions. But for some, it was a chance to start anew.
After we got onto the tractor, one of the students asked me something. I remember that as soon as she opened her mouth, I cried because it had been a very, very long time since anyone had spoken to me.
That's absolutely heartbreaking. It's sick to do this to people.
Later, I told them I was not like them. I was someone who was wrong, who was guilty. But they were especially nice to me. We stayed together for 5 years. Even now, they are my best friends.
These are the outcomes of communism whenever it comes to power.
April 1969.
Listen to that voice. He talks like an old wise frog in an anime.
Most delegates at the Congress were radicals who had risen to power through the Cultural Revolution. Many moderate officials were still under attack and in prison. Lin Biao, long seen as Mao's heir apparent, was officially appointed his successor.
Enough out of Mao. You guys get the picture. We're getting towards the end of episode 2 of the American Culture War. So far, we've covered the useful idiots, Antifa, BLM, those on the lower level who do the bidding of the Marxist organizers. We took a look at their meetings, their power to organize mass protests and blockades, the places they infiltrated, and how they'll also work for foreign governments. When working for foreign governments, they're mostly posing as journalists. We also covered the horrific abominations that come out of communist policy wherever they come to power. We've covered the horrors of what it causes, bringing out the worst in men, cannibalism, even doing so with their own children, eating them because of starvation and man-made famine. We've gotten into communist culture wars, the Chinese culture war, which is very similar to America's culture war in many ways, like the having to abolish the four olds, Han privilege, similar to white privilege in America. The four olds being old ideas, old culture, old customs, old habits, which is similar to abolishing religion in Western communism. But unfortunately, this episode got long too, so I don't think we're going to be able to cover freedom as I stated in this episode. So obviously there's going to be a part 3 now for this. But what I will cover in this is 2 things that are hindering freedoms in more recent times. We know about the Patriot Act and all the other stuff, but in more recent time. So I have a clip from Thomas Sowell, which I'll go over first, and then I have another clip that's from something that happened in Congress recently, which if you haven't heard of it yet, I'm sure you're going to be shocked, as I was when you say it. But then again, nothing shocks me anymore with the overreach of this government and how it will do anything and spy on everyone just to protect itself. The machine will do everything to protect the machine. But before we get into these clips, I want you to take notice of the difference on how the conservatives are treated and how the progressives are treated. Conservative groups are infiltrated and radicalized and deemed extremist. A lot of times there might be 14 guys in a group and 12 of them are actually feds. So conservative groups are being infiltrated while the leftist groups are doing the infiltrating, and they're also committing crazy acts of violence, which is stirred up by the Marxist organizers, and they do so with impunity, and they end up getting bailed out, to where it's the opposite for the conservatives. There's almost no conservative reputation in media. If you want to say Fox is, then maybe. But yet the liberals completely control Hollywood and all media. The liberals outspend the Republicans 4 times as much, I believe it is, because all the corporations back them, all the mega donors back them, yet the people who donate to Republicans are mostly regular people. Unless it's a uniparty hack, then yeah, they might receive funding from some corporations, but the libs outspend the conservatives by 4 times. Conservatives are treated horrible on all social media platforms except for Rumble maybe, and X, I guess. I mean, I can go on and on, but let's get to these next 2 clips and you'll see what I'm talking about. One is a little older and the other one is very recent.
Are you an extremist? While the rest of us may be worried about violent Mexican drug gangs on our border or about terrorists who are going to be released from Guantanamo, the Director of Homeland Security is worried about right-wing extremists. Just who are these right-wing extremists? According to an official document of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, right-wing extremists include groups and individuals that are dedicated to a single issue, such as opposition to abortion or immigration. It also includes those rejecting federal authority in favor of state or local authority. If you fit into any of these categories, you may not have realized that you were considered a threat to national security, but apparently the Obama administration has its eye on you. According to the same official document, the Department of Homeland Security has no specific information that domestic right-wing terrorists are currently planning acts of violence. But somehow they just know that you right-wingers are itching to unleash terror somewhere, somehow. So-called honor killings by Muslims in the United States, including a recent beheading of his wife by a leader of one of the American Muslim organizations, do not seem to arouse any concern by the Department of Homeland Security. When it comes to the thuggery of community activist groups, their members harassing the homes of bankers and even the home of Senator Phil Gramm when he opposed things that these community activist groups favored, the Department of Homeland Security apparently sees no evil, hears no evil, and speaks no evil. Maybe they are too busy worrying about right-wing extremists who don't like abortions or illegal immigration, or who favor the division of power between the state and federal governments established by the Constitution. In one sense, the Department of Homeland Security paper is silly. In another sense, it can be sinister as a revealing and disturbing sign of the preoccupations and priorities of this administration, and their willingness to witch hunt and demonize those who dare to disagree with them. Reportedly, the FBI and the Defense Department are cooperating with the Department of Homeland Security in investigations of returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. That people who have put their lives on the line for this country are made the target of what is called the Vigilant Eagle program suggests that this administration might be more of a threat than the people they are investigating. All this activity takes on a more sinister aspect against the background of one of the statements of Barack Obama during last year's election campaign that got remarkably little attention in the media. He suggested the creation of a federal police force, comparable in size to the military. Why such an organization? For what purpose? Since there are state and local police forces all across the country, an FBI to investigate federal crimes, and a Department of Justice to prosecute those who commit them, as well as a Defense Department with military forces, just what role would a federal police force play? Maybe it was just one of those bright ideas that gets floated during an election campaign. Yet there was no grassroots demand for any such federal police force, nor any media clamor for it, so there was not even any political reason to suggest such a thing. What would be different about a new federal police force as compared to existing law enforcement and military forces? It would be a creation of the Obama administration, run by people appointed from top to bottom by that administration, and without the conflicting loyalties of those steeped in existing military traditions and law enforcement traditions. In short, a federal police force could become President Obama's personal domestic political army, his own stormtroopers. Perhaps there will never be such a federal police force, but the targeting of individuals and groups who believe in some of the fundamental values on which this country was founded, and people who have demonstrated their patriotism by volunteering for military service, suggests that this potential for political abuse is worth watching as Obama tries to remake America to fit his vision.
I hope you guys are taking notice to this two-tiered system and how all the emphasis of all the evil deeds and the violent extremism is always pointed towards the constitutional conservatives, even though that's not the case. And as we've seen, they're the ones that are being infiltrated, where they're finding out that there's 10 people and 8 of them are feds in these supposedly violent extremist groups. Then on the other hand, you have people being bailed out who hate America, want to destroy its constitution and abolish capitalism and bring in a communist America. All the while, they're burning stuff down, and when they actually do report on the actions of these people, they say that it's a fiery but peaceful protest. Is this real life? Believing in the Constitution as the supreme law of the land makes you an extremist? Hell, I seen a video the other day of a guy recording a cop, and the cop said to the guy, "What are you, one of those constitutionalist weirdos?" Yeah, I'm one of those guys who believes in the thing that you swore an oath to. But make no mistake, as we've seen in China and Russia, after the Cultural Revolution is over, then the communist machine comes to destroy its useful idiots, the people who helped them get through their revolution and make the changes that they wanted. They come back to destroy them after they use them. Now, let's get into the most recent video of this shadowy deep state government infringing upon our rights secretly behind closed doors.
We'll start with opening statements, then move into our witnesses. The chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. Big government was colluding with big tech to censor Americans. That's the first thing we learned. But now it's big government colluding with big banks and big business to spy on everything Americans buy, every place they go, everything they do. Big government wants your financial data because it's full of sensitive information about you. Our investigation started when an FBI whistleblower, George Hill, came forward and talked to the committee. Mr. Hill was supervisory intelligence analyst at the FBI up in the Boston field office, told the committee that the FBI got information from Bank of America. Specifically, it received a list of any customer who made purchases in the Washington, D.C. area January 5th through 7th, 2021. The whistleblower supervisor, special agent in charge of the Boston field office, Mr. Bonavolanta, corroborated Mr. Hill's testimony when he spoke to the committee. And so did Steve Jensen, the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Operations Section Chief. But it wasn't just purchase data around a specific date that the FBI got from Bank of America. That was actually also overlaid with any firearm purchase at any time. And how did the FBI get this information? They asked for it. In fact, you can see on the display on the screen here the email that was sent. The FBI told Bank of America, to recap our morning call, we are prepared to action immediately the following threshold: customers confirmed as transacting business in Washington, D.C. between these specific dates. So if you're in Washington, D.C., visiting your kids, maybe visiting your aunt, or maybe just a friend, the FBI wanted to know about every single purchase you made. And if you're a gun owner, look out, you're going to the top of the list. For simply exercising your Second Amendment right, you're on the FBI's target list.
We've been saying this.
Never forget, the federal government got this information without any process. No warrant, and frankly, no notification. The bank didn't tell the customer that we're handing this information over to the FBI, the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world. Now, these FBI agents, Mr. Hill, Mr. Bonavolante, Mr. Jensen, they all said this was wrong and, in fact, sent the information back to FBI headquarters in D.C. So that's how our investigation began. But since then, and we continue to investigate, but since then, we've learned that the financial surveillance was broader and there was actually a specific objective. The federal government is building profiles on the American people. And the profile isn't based on criminal conduct, it's based on political beliefs. And if you got the wrong political beliefs, well, you're potentially a domestic violent extremist.
Social credit scores
now, how
are
are they
here.
actually doing this? What are the mechanics of this? There's this entity we've discovered called the Domestic Security Alliance Council, kind of Orwellian in sound and title, the DSAC. And this is...
Can we just call them ball bags?
This is an entity where the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, works with 650 of the largest companies in the world. These companies have to do over $1 billion in revenue a year. They represent 2/3 of the gross domestic product of the United States economy. And they work through this controlled access portal. We'll put that on the screen here. What are they sharing in this secret portal? Well, we're not exactly sure because it's secret. But we do know that they share some information, share reports. And one of the reports we got, called a liaison information report, said this: any American who opposes firearm legislation, the easing of immigration restrictions, and COVID mandates is someone banks should be watching because, again, they might be an extremist. Now stop and think about that for a second. I mean, just in other words, if you're against gun registration, you're for a secured border, you oppose lockdowns and vaccine mandates, you're a domestic violent extremist, according to the FBI, and the government should get your data, should get your financial data. It actually gets worse. The federal government and banks also use what they call merchant category codes to flag Americans that shop at places like Bass Pro Shop and Cabela's. They flagged Americans who bought religious text. We can show you that one too. Because everybody knows if you want a secure border and you oppose COVID lockdowns, then you probably shop at Bass Pro Shops and you read your Bible, and of course all that makes you an extremist. Literally, that is the logic that you see displayed from the information we've been able to gather thus far in our investigation. Now remember, these are also the same folks who just a couple years ago told us if you're a parent showing up at a school board meeting, you're a terrorist. If you're a pro-life Catholic, you're an extremist. Now, of course, if you oppose lockdowns, vaccine mandates, want a secure border, don't want gun registration, you're in that category as well. This is scary where things are headed. We've seen the censorship. Now we see what's happening with big banks and big government relative to your financial data. Again, all this being done with no process, no warrant, no notification to the customer that the banks are actually supposed to serve. Big government's not supposed to use big tech to censor Americans, and big government shouldn't be working with big banks to target Americans for behavior that is legal and constitutional. And that's the concern. That's why we're having this hearing. We'll get to our guest here in a second.
The lines have been drawn. They will pick a side for you if you don't pick a side. And unfortunately, that's what they're trying to force everyone to do. But let's get into one more stumbling block to liberty. More tyrannical, secret proceedings by a secret government, once secretly but now overtly trying to destroy constitutional conservatives and especially Christian constitutional conservatives. Now let's get into these clips. These clips are from part 1, in case you haven't seen it. This tyrannical overreach that you're about to see is ranging from the 90s to present time, and it's always hostility towards the constitutional conservatives.
MAGA forces are determined
MAGA again.
to take this country backwards to an America where there is no right to choose, no right to privacy.
Well, since he brought up an actual right, the right to privacy, let's take a look at what his regime has been doing to Trump supporters and anybody they disagree with, and we'll look at what the feds have been doing to 2A supporters for a long time.
The TSA's Quiet Skies watch list program has reportedly expanded to include the family members of J6 participants. This came to light after A.J. Fisher's family, a J6 defendant, noticed the secret TSA codes on his infant child's boarding pass. Analysts comment, though this specific incident relies on single-source reporting at the moment, it is worthy of consideration as this event highlights the continued targeting of J6 participants. This targeting and the expansion of investigations, arrests, and raids has continued with virtually zero mainstream media coverage. The Quiet Skies program is a substantial TSA surveillance program that was revealed to the public in 2018 after years of secrecy. Anyone flying in the United States can check their boarding pass for special characters, such as 4 S's, which indicates they have been flagged as being a national security risk and will likely be subjected to additional screening.
Now let's go back and look how in the past Democrats and the FBI have been going after and trying to infiltrate 2A groups.
By the way, Andreas Strassmeyer is the son of Gunther Strassmeyer, who was the chief of staff for Helmut Kohl, the former premier of Germany. He was equivalent of the president of Germany. And what in the world? We found out that actually it was Al Gore.
Another Democrat trampling on the Constitution.
That requested the German government send Andreas Strassmeyer to the United States to infiltrate neo-Nazi groups in the U.S. Well, the FBI caught wind of that and pretty much geared it toward their efforts to set up, gun rights and Second Amendment people that supported that sort of movement in a very good way. These people weren't fanatics, but it was Strassmeyer was there to basically stir the pot. And Jesse Trinity was a quote in the film is like, you have these guys trying to infiltrate these groups of 6 guys, and you find out 4 of them working for the U.S. government. I mean, it was a fix.
And then more recently, there was this.
So to find that level of conspiratorial corruption at the highest levels of the FBI has been very troubling to me as a man, as a cop. And yet, you follow the evidence wherever it leads. And
yes,
this is what investigators do. So when I asked Christopher Wray that question, for instance, I already knew the answer. I had reviewed compelling evidence that the FBI had assets, human assets, dressed as Trump supporters inside the Capitol prior to the doors being open and the masses allowed in. So I knew that the FBI was deeply involved. I'd seen evidence, even at that time, with that the FBI had embedded themselves into various groups online across the country of Americans who were essentially voicing their concerns and airing their grievances with each other about COVID oppression. And those Americans were targeted by the FBI, almost universally Republicans and largely Trump supporters, but the FBI worked undercover to infiltrate those conversations and become a significant part of those individual Americans' communications. And when you dig into the evidence that we've had revealed through some criminal cases that I've followed and worked with the families of J6 political detainees and Americans that have been persecuted for their involvement in the Capitol that day, some of that evidence shockingly reveals that the FBI agents that were operating undercover within the online groups across the country were the first ones to plant the seeds of suggestions of a more radical occupation of the capital.
And unfortunately, we have become the enemy in our own country. The people who believe in our nation's founding and its principles have become the enemy because the machine has to protect itself and it needs to gain more power. It will do anything to protect itself and to protect its power and to continue to gain power, which is why they have to sidestep the Constitution behind the scenes through bureaucrats and other means, using banks, using our phone companies, etc. As I've stated in part 1, it will reach a boiling point. Americans will get fed up. Lines will be drawn. People will pick the hill that they are going to die on. And people will defend their freedoms at all costs, just as the machine will defend its power at all costs. We can't expect government to try and correct and fix government. If a miracle ever does occur and government does attempt to limit itself, it's usually only done by these House Republicans like Thomas Massie, Jim Jordan, and so on. We need to depend on we the people. We cannot depend on the few politicians that we do have alone. We must become better prepared citizens if we want to reach self-sustainability. We need to be networking and building communities and training together, finding like-minded individuals to have your back, people who you can count on in an SHTF scenario. Store food, store water, store supplies, and train with your gear. That's all I got for you guys in this one. I know it got long also. Next episode, we'll get into liberty, how to maintain liberty, and we'll also compare it to anarchy, explained by the most famous anarchist of our day, Michael Malice. And Malice is actually a really intelligent dude, so we'll hear from him in part 3, and we'll focus on liberty in that episode. We're done with communist tyranny. That was just to lay the groundwork so we can do what we're going to do in part 3, which is contrast it with freedom, our founding principles. We'll also take a look at the politics of obedience, an excerpt from that book, which gives us a way to maintain liberty. So stay tuned, guys. I have a lot of good stuff in store for part 3. I'm sure you're going to like it. If you made it this far, I appreciate you sticking around. I hope you guys liked it, and I hope to see you in part 3. God bless, guys.